Hey, good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades.
You have a new hand grenade.
I got a new hand grenade. My favorite co-host ripped off the other one. I still like her, though.
Yeah, I mean, she's all right, but
She's all right.
She takes her weapons. What else did she take?
I don't know. She's going to Colorado, so maybe she really needed it for protection. So.
Maybe. Is that a rough place?
Apparently, if you need a damn hand grenade to get around.
I guess so.
Anyway, tonight we're talking about bullying with Dr. Malcolm Smith from UNH, and he's written a book, so to speak, on bullying.
So to speak.
And Ben Dick, who is a teacher at Memorial High School, is here to talk about it. He missed Dr. Malcolm's presentation at the high school, so he's forced to sit in this evening to find out the information.
Willing participants.
Yeah, okay, whatever. Matt's here, of course, and my daughter is supposed to be here, but I don't know where she is. Maybe she's out buying hand grenades. Anyway.
I hope so. We should all have one.
We should. Everybody should have a hand grenade. I think I should introduce legislation about that. You know what I mean? Instead of, can you have a right to carry, you should have a right to have a hand grenade. But anyway, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Malcolm Smith and let him have the floor for at least the first quarter of the hour to kind of give us an update of what's going on and so people know what this issue is and stuff. So take it away.
Well, thanks, Representative. I don't know if we want to go a whole quarter of an hour here, but you guys chime in whenever you have something to say. I thought the place that would be best to start is just to define bullying. As everybody's getting ready to go back to school, it's on a lot of parents' minds, and it's something that I've spent about 30 years of my life studying. It's a behavior among children, and I think I'm real proud that New Hampshire has a very strong anti-bullying law that we passed a couple of years ago. The governor signed into law back in June of 2010. And that law, I think, has a great definition. And there are a couple of things about bullying that a lot of parents don't understand. First, in New Hampshire law, bullying is an event that happens between two or more children that involves, first, the preventing of a child from obtaining an education. So that's the first condition that has to happen in bullying. And that's very crucial for teachers to understand. So it has to rise to this pretty high level that you're preventing someone either physically or psychologically from getting an education.
How does that relate to? I know that bus drivers are in a situation where they might witness bullying also, but how does that work?
Well, bus drivers are under the law mandated reporters because really you're considered to be at school from the time you get on the bus. Okay. If something happens on a bus that is so pervasive, and that's the word in the law, pervasive, that it intimidates you from getting to school, or it physically, hurts you in a way, or precludes you from getting to school, then that could certainly happen and does happen regularly on buses. So that's the first part, and that's not the most important part. The second part of the definition is the best part of the law because I wrote it, and here's what it says.
I got it right here.
Yeah, well,
did you write it, or did you write it so to speak?
Yeah, so to speak. Representative Schlackman and many other people worked on it, but it's the part that I got to write, and they put it in the law.
Yeah.
So here's what it says. That we define bullying in New Hampshire as an imbalance of power between two children. And this is crucial for parents to understand, for teachers to understand, for everybody. So if Mr. Dick here, for example, and I, or two white gentlemen, we weigh about the same, we're about the same age, we're about the same.
I don't think that's true.
Yeah, I know,
No,
but let's just use your imagination here. Use your imagination.
Teachers do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so we're using our thinking caps now, Representative.
Right.
So
No, wait, I'm a politician.
Oh, I forgot.
Yeah, okay.
Can't think out of the box
No.
there, can you? So we're shoving in the hall. Is that bullying? Not necessarily. If we're two kids equal, and there's no imbalance of power there, that might be physical aggression, That might be physical harassment. That might be a million other things, but it's not bullying.
Okay.
But if I say to him, don't come in this room because you're black or you're brown or you're white, then there's an imbalance of power. You see, race can be one of those imbalance of powers. If you think about schools in Manchester, there are a lot of different imbalances of power. It could be social. You know, you're a member of the cheerleaders and you're excluding me because I'm not. You're a jock and you're strong and I'm weak. You're a computer nerd and you know how to work the internet and you're using that to your advantage to ruin my reputation.
That's what you see a lot of
That's
now.
an imbalance of power. So you see there, and there are many of those in our society and in our schools in Manchester. So what we said in the law is that when those two things together, one, it rises to the level of interfering with a child's right to an education, and second, there's an imbalance of power, then it's something called bullying, and we're not going to tolerate it in our schools. And myself, I am very passionate about this because in 1991, I was working at a place in Kansas called the Menninger Clinic. I worked with the great psychiatrist Carl Menninger, and my best friend from fourth grade was teaching in a school in Kansas City, and she experienced something that many teachers in our country have experienced. She was shot to death outside on her first day of public school teaching outside a school in Kansas City. The child who shot her, a 14-year-old boy, mistook her. She was very beautiful, very young looking, very petite person. He mistook her for a group of girls that had been mercilessly bullying and harassing him. I work on the National Crisis Team. I have since my friend was killed. I've been at 54 school shootings in the United States. And I can tell you as a researcher who's worked with both the CIA and the U.S. Department of Education on this issue, when we took the computers at Langley and the CIA and the Secret Service wanted to know what is the profile of a school shooter, we were given the largest computer bank in the world to run 4,000 bits of data from 54 school shooters. And here's what we found out, that the only thing that brought all those kids together, from Columbine to Oregon to Red Lake, Minnesota, to even the child that opened fire at Virginia Tech, where I was on the National Crisis Team, they all had one thing in common. They were mercilessly harassed and bullied by other kids. The most dangerous child in our schools, I feel, after years of research on this topic, are kids who've been bullied mercilessly. We did nothing about it, and one day they try to take it into their own hands. And those turn out to be also the person, and the research follows this, the person in the workplace who ends up walking into a building or a post office and opening fires at their coworkers. Bullying is one of the most devastating acts in our society. But let's, I'm talking about extreme cases, and I want to come back to this.
Well, that's not necessarily, the extreme cases tend to give you a guidepost of what's really going on. Obviously, there's a spectrum of reactions to the same stimulus. I mean, typically, I love this. I love this experiment. It's so sadistic. They took little girls and little boys before they were quite verbal, and they put them in this room, and Mom walked out of the room, and they had a plexiglass barrier. Okay, so Mom walks out of the room, and the kid doesn't know what to do. It's not a hostile environment, but the little kid wanted to chase Mom. So the little girls would invariably go up to the plexiglass, realize they can't get to Mom, sit down and cry. Little boys would try to knock it down.
Interesting. Yeah.
Okay, same stimulus, different reactions. So the shootings and stuff, I mean, those same boys that are getting aggressive and shooting, the girls are committing suicide.
Yeah, they internalize it, and that's exactly right. They take those feelings and take them inside. And the suicide rate among girls who have had a serious incident of bullying is 6 times higher than the average, and the United States, again, this year, has the highest rate of teen suicide in the world. It is the second leading cause of death among our teenagers. And it's been increasing because of this epidemic. But I want to say something before we go any further. As a researcher, I'm concerned, but as a dad, I'm scared to death. And I'll tell you why. I believe that we are raising one of the meanest generations we've ever raised in the United States right now. And we see evidence of this because when we test kids for normative scores in school, you know, the No Child Left Behind tests that have been controversial, we have also been gathering data about their cognitive abilities or their abilities to get along with other people.
Yep.
And what we're seeing is that our students have less ability to share. Our younger students have less respect for other people. They have a greater sense of entitlement than almost any generation we've tested. And I'm deeply worried about that. See, we have an epidemic going on, and that's part of the reason we needed this law so badly. And when we start looking at the reporting data, which the State Department of Education is just beginning to release, we saw Nashua's figures and Manchester's are just coming out. When we look at this, we're going to see a very high incidence of bullying. And I'll tell you why. Do you remember, you guys all remember about a year ago, in the fall, we had another epidemic scare. It was the bird flu or the chicken flu or the swine flu. I can't remember. It's gone now. But
SARS,
swine,
but that was like years ago.
and SARS, and we've had. But do you remember? Everybody was freaking out. People were on airplanes with masks. People wouldn't talk to each other. We were all coughing like this, you know.
Right.
People were up in arms demanding that our State Department stockpile immunizations. People were running to Walgreens and overloading them with,
Yeah, I was up in the State House selling fake vaccines and stuff.
That's very enterprising.
I'm sure most of the Republicans were doing that. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, imagine, just go with me for a minute. Imagine that we had an epidemic that we knew, according to the Center for Disease Control and the U.S. Department of Education, two groups of researchers who don't normally lie to us. Imagine that we had an epidemic that they, at the best guess, say will affect between 30 to 40% of our school-age population in Manchester and all of New Hampshire. Imagine that we've known about this epidemic for 25 years. That's about how old our research is on it. That we've done nothing effective towards it. And imagine that it's growing at about 30% a year. Imagine that we've spent very little money and very little time investigating, and that its side effects, at the minimum, can cause depression, post-traumatic stress syndrome, but at the maximum, cause death. And we've done nothing. Wouldn't all the parents in this community be up in arms? Wouldn't we be going down to the State House and demanding more regulation and more help for our children? And so that's why when a group of mothers got together in Exeter and began this march that became our new public law about bullying, I was there. And I was a victim myself of bullying as a child. I grew up in a farm and went to a one-room school and was sent to a 2,500 student high school my junior year. And I became, my first day of school, farm trash. And then when
I was going to say that about you.
Yeah,
said,
well,
I won't, you know.
when I rejected the way they treated me at that school, they had a place for us. It was called the SPED trailer. And you remember they had these little metal trailers out behind well, I still see them all over New Hampshire, where they stuck us SPED kids. And I was out there with 30 brothers and sisters who had Mongolism and all forms of mental retardation. And there were about 5 or 6 screw-ups like me, and there were kids who were blind and deaf, and we all went to school in that little trailer out there. But at lunchtime, they would march, all 30 of us, and our teacher, who taught about 10 years longer than her brain, would make us grab a ship's rope, a handle on it, and she'd slap us if we didn't, and she would march us into a cafeteria filled with 1,000 students eating lunch. And then it was sped, and they'd throw the pizza at us, and they'd knock us over, knock the kids in wheelchairs over and kick them, pull that rope to watch us fall down. And I learned firsthand. It changed my life. It made me, and anybody in this audience who's been the victim of severe bullying, the effects of bullying last into adulthood.
Oh,
They
yeah,
don't go
sure.
away. And the effects of being a bully cost us millions in our society. Listen, here's what our research shows. Just listen to a few of these things. A child who is a bully at school is more likely to drink, smoke, and use illicit substances than any other child. A child who is a bully at school is more likely to be involved in domestic violence or physical violence with others later in life, about 200% more likely. A child who bullies in school and is not disciplined for it and not caught and properly dealt with is more likely to end up in the social service system or in prison and cost us thousands of dollars a year. So any time and money we spend on bullying is well spent.
You talked a little bit about the characteristic of the victim, but what is the bully themselves?
Well, can I ask a question first? I just want, because it was just mentioned at the end, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about it.
Well,
Maybe.
maybe I'm screwed. I just screwed that up, didn't I?
Yeah, you want to go the other way.
Yeah.
We'll
That's
talk
right. You're the
about
one with the grenade. You can
Right,
do whatever
right,
you
right.
want.
Say whatever you want. You mentioned at the very end of that, bullies who aren't disciplined or dealt with or caught early enough, however you want to put it. Now that we're facing this epidemic, as you put it, it's getting worse and it's getting more prevalent. Do we have the resources as we stand today? You know, I think of my administrators. That's where we go. I'm a teacher. If I see it, I have a chain of command that I follow. And I don't think I'm speaking out of turn when I say they are inundated now. What used to be a job where they were responsible for 30 things, they're still responsible for 30 things, but they have the time to focus on 2, one of which is bullying. But even in that sense, I wonder if they have the time and the resources to address it well enough that we can try and prevent this
Well,
down the road problem.
I want to say 2 things to that. First, I want to tell you that I went to a one-room school. My teacher had 25 students, K through 12. She was there at 5:30 in the morning and she didn't leave till 6:30 at night. She got paid $4,000 for that privilege. And she got the big bonus of having to live with the children in the community. Now, I have a hard time when people tell me that, nobody told you this job of teaching was going to be an easy one. I didn't tell you that.
No.
But I want to say this: there is nothing more precious than the safety of our children.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more.
So let's back up a little bit. But let me address specifically what you said. The solution is very simple. Number one, and that's why we created this law. If we catch them early, it's easy fix. So let me tell you what we know. Here's the science behind it. A bully is a child who has, first, a learning deficit. Just like, we look at kids in special ed programs and in any of our curricula, we look at kids who have a learning deficit and we try to improve this deficit. Where this deficit falls with a bully is in the back part of the brain here, where we achieve social learning. And what this child probably has gotten, and it's interesting because the research shows us that bullies really are the kids that we thought they were. They are the kid who's been privileged. They are the jock. They are the cheerleader. They are the socialite who come from a home where there was very high expectations, but very low interaction. So you hear what I'm saying?
I do.
So because of that deficit, they were saying, I was talking to you guys earlier that, the research shows us these are the kids who were sent to, La Petite Académie instead of, mom and pop's childcare. They went to Gymboree instead of a playgroup. But what those programs didn't give them was grandma standing there saying, "We don't hit. You open the door for older people." So the first is easy. One of the things, and it becomes harder at your level, at the high school level,
Sure.
but starting in preschool,
Right.
we've got to get back into schools something that we used to teach. Every high school in the country used to have a class called civics. And you were expected, most of you went
Sure.
to it,
We
you
had
were
it at our
expected
school.
Oh, yeah,
to learn.
I remember skipping out of that.
But it was based on Benjamin Franklin's idea that in order to get along in a democracy, you had better learn how to live socially. The second thing is this: we have decimated our mental health system in New Hampshire and the country. And the second thing we know is that this is a behavior that doesn't start in mental illness, it creates mental illness. You see what I'm saying? So
Right.
if we let bullying go on, what's going to happen, and this is what those statistics about a bully I was telling you later,
Right.
what we see is that they go from being a kid who gets away with a few things to being someone who feeds on this, who becomes sick. And so they walk into mental illness by conditioning their brain to pick on others. So the second thing that we've got to do is bring our mental health and our prevention resources into the school to deal with it. You're right, teachers shouldn't have to deal with this alone.
Well, that's not what I meant.
Yeah, but
Right.
we've got to create centers in our schools where, and many states have done this, where there are parent education, working in the school, where schools are places parents want to be, not places that parents are scared to enter. And that's one of the changes we've got to make. But the second is this. Here's the simple thing. Here's Dr. Smith's remedy for a bully. Right? And if you use this in semester...
I will. Let's do
Mr.
this.
Dick, I want you to use this
I
in your
will.
class this
All right.
semester. And if it doesn't work, call me because you're doing something wrong.
Okay.
All right.
Which is fair. But you're probably
No
right.
matter what
This is
way
the
you look
lecture.
at it.
This is the lecture you missed, and you're going to pay the
Please,
penalty.
please.
And I'm going to have your superintendent check up
Oh,
on
no,
you. So,
no.
yeah. We'll give
We
Tom
mean
a call.
enough. We mean enough.
Okay.
Wonderful man.
Now, here's what I
kinda
want you to
bullying
do.
him.
Yeah, I know.
Really?
Sometimes
It's
yeah.
a demonstration. It's
That's
a
right,
demonstration.
right.
Yes.
All right. No comments from the peanut gallery.
It's role playing.
All right, now, first thing you do is you have to make this child take responsibility. Not make them, but expect them to take responsibility for their acts. So they'll say, I didn't do that. No, I didn't do it. And here's the first rule. You will not participate in my class. You will not get out of in-school suspension. You will not enter again here. You won't ride that bus. You won't play on that sports team until you tell me, number one, you've got to tell me what you did was wrong. So you've got to tell me what the behavior you did that was wrong. So the first thing we know about bullies is they'll do anything to get out of the behavior. So the first learning lesson, and this is, remember, we're working on this part of the brain right here. First thing you've got to do, and this is really good for parents at home, is you've got to, before you can go play your video game or whatever you're going to do, you're going to have to sit here and tell me what you did that was wrong. And number two,
Okay.
let me get through
Please,
these.
go ahead,
okay?
go ahead.
Number two, then I want you to tell me why it was wrong. Now, if you're not going to tell me this, you're not going to engage in this conversation, you're not coming back to my class. Enjoy in-school suspension, enjoy being out of school, but this is going to be a condition of your participation.
Accountability.
Accountability. And that's the first thing we've learned. Okay, next, that's not enough. Next, I want you to tell me, and you're going to have to help some of your students with this, because this is where they have a deficit. And this is where the social learning begins. You're going to have to tell me what you could do differently next time. So, you're going to help them say, when you feel like picking on him because he's a different color than you, what's something nice you could do instead? Or what could you do with that time that would be more constructive? Okay, so that, you don't have to love the kid.
Right.
I'm just saying you've got to do something else with those feelings that's more constructive towards your education and your life.
Right.
Because what you're doing isn't working. And then, most of you guys do pretty good at those two parts. You have those conversations, but you forget the third thing. And the third thing is where you really begin to stimulate the brain. First question I want to ask you all is, how did you learn manners?
Dad
taught and
used to
reinforced.
absolutely just about drop kick me if I didn't.
Absolutely. It was
Yeah.
repetition.
Right, right.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
every time you chewed with your mouth open, Mom was over there saying,
Yeah.
we don't want to see that,
My parents told me no elbows on the table.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
Again and again.
I have
We-
2-year-old twins, and it's please and thank
Yeah,
you.
how
Yeah,
you
thank
teach,
please,
yeah,
and
yeah,
thank you.
or you open the door for older people,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
Now, so this is what these kids have missed, the bullies. So the third thing we're going to do is, you're not coming back into my class, you're not participating, you're not going to play that video game, you're not going to get that story read to you until you do this third thing. You got to do something, a random act of kindness to make up for what you did wrong. Now, the Jewish call that a mitzvah. I like that term. In the Christian faith, we call it an atonement. But every faith in the world has this concept. And it is that, and the reason you're doing this is to repair the hole in your brain.
Okay.
So that third part is essential, and that's what we never do in schools.
I think,
And it doesn't,
I'm
you know,
sorry.
and let me just say this. Some people say, well, you know, maybe the victim doesn't want to be around. That's fine. You don't have to do it for the victim. You could do it for the teacher.
next victim.
The people who had to witness your
Sure,
bad
sure.
behavior, the teacher who had to clean up your mess, the janitor who had to,
Mm-hmm.
be there and see all this. But you got to do something nice for somebody else, because that is where we teach how to live in society.
Okay, if I guess here's my, no, I'm really glad.
The sermon was starting
I
to
was
come.
saying before the show, this is why I'm so glad to be here, is because I'm interested professionally, but also just to get a better handle on it myself. Everything you said makes perfect sense to me, and I'd like to think, especially with one of the populations I teach, that I do 95% of that. And I think that the one hang-up within a school setting that we may have is my inability to enact such a consequence. I can't tell you you can't come back until
No,
such
no.
and such a date.
But
And
you
there,
could-
I think that's my hang,
Yeah,
not my
yeah.
personal hang-up.
So
that's I need help with that.
So you got to be creative. So it can be you don't get to participate in this fun activity that we do every day at the end of class, or you don't. You're going to be excluded, just like you excluded other people from something in the class that you like to do. Or you're going to have an extra duty until you do these things. So it's just having you need some carrot.
Right. Now, maybe this is the cynic in me, so I apologize to everybody before I spit this out. What happens when, and I can see it happening, because you can't do this until I'm the one who's excluding, I'm the one who's perpetuating the behavior that I'm trying to stop by excluding
Yeah.
this person from something.
It's all in how you present it.
Okay.
And how you present it is not that you're going to exclude it, but that I know you can do better.
Right.
And here's how you're going to do it.
Okay.
And it's going to be a win-win situation. You can present any rule like,
Sure.
if you screw up, I'll take this away. Well, we have, and particularly the bullies will go to level 0. That's why these stupid level systems that we set for kids never work. They've tried this for years, that negative reinforcement. So instead, you present it this way. I know you can do better. And when you do, you'll get that reward.
Gotcha.
And what you're thinking is, man, Dr. Smith's telling you to bribe your students.
no.
And that's exactly what I'm telling you. To bribe them for their good
I'm
behavior.
okay with that. I do it again.
Bribe them for their good behavior. And I'm
able
telling
to,
all the parents out there too, because what are we trying to raise kids to do but live in a society that's full of contracts, and every one I have is positive.
No, I mean,
You know?
I totally agree with that. I mean, people who want to bribe me to vote certain ways, I'm absolutely
We'll talk
for
after
that.
you.
You can bribe them with hamburgers.
Hey, one of our members of our audience, Sir William, would like to ask a question.
I'd like to ask Mr. Dick.
No, nobody can hear you. You're gonna have to.
Sidle on up to the.
Uh-oh.
Okay, in the satellite.
There you go.
Yeah, Mr. Dick,
Sir.
does currently in your school district, are you given the tools and the guidelines to be able to come anywhere close to applying what Dr. Smith is putting forward?
Well, I think again, unfortunately, I missed it, but I think a big step in the right direction was bringing Dr. Smith in at the end of last year in the first place. I work with the teachers union, and one of the things we have been discussing with Dr. Brennan that we wanted to have a little more guidance on was the bullying issue, and working on ways to be more on top of it in our classroom, because we're the first line of defense. Maybe outside after the school bus, because obviously that's where your day begins. And one of the things he did, and again, I was telling him, the rave reviews I heard of his meetings with our teachers was that this is a good first step. The first question I asked him when I met him tonight was, I need a better definition. I'm worried that we jump to a bullying level too quickly, and he was very good about explaining to me exactly what he explained here, and those little things help us. I think the next step is making sure that now, as we get a better understanding of it, when we do take it down the chain of command that we need to, we will be able to move it along better. Because it isn't about filtering through, well, did it meet these criteria?
Right.
Does it hit that level? Because we're all going to have a better understanding of it. And I think that will be a real, I want to say, test of our abilities to work on this problem in this upcoming year. And I think that's a good step.
And I think
So, excuse me.
Sure.
But one fallacy I see in this is a chain of command, a chain. You are the first responder. You are the person there.
Right.
You are, you, in my opinion, need to be given the power to make the decision to act, not to pass it off to a lower level functionary, a mid-level functionary, an assistant principal, you know.
I would love the power. If you could
Yeah.
get it for
Yeah,
me. No,
yeah,
but
That's
yeah.
what you have to have
Well, I think
to
Yeah.
implement
I think what
this.
we have, and that's why, again, I want to go back to what Dr. Smith was saying in his steps. I honestly, and I'm all false modesty aside, I was so happy to hear most of those steps because I feel like I do
doing
them.
them already.
You know, I have this idea of, I put it slightly differently. I said, listen, I don't have to like you outside of class, but in here, you don't have to like people, but you're gonna get along. And you're
Yeah.
not gonna give people a hard time. I won't stand it because I always tell them we're in the same boat. We're here together. And I think that my best ability, because I don't have certain powers, is my repetition of ways to act and expectations. You know, we have certain sayings in my classroom about ways you're expected to be. You're expected to try your best. Don't think you're the best. Try your best. And it's that repetition, that driving it
Right.
home that I think is our greatest power. If we can get us all to do it from day one in the first grade, the second grade, I won't see it hopefully in 10
But-
years.
Well, and he's making a really interesting point here about, here's what we've seen. Bullying is starting earlier and earlier.
Certainly.
Than it ever had in my generation. Well, kids are, and it starts with this. I was at the university preschool the other day. You know, it's supposed to be this model preschool. And
Yeah.
I'm watching a student, of mine working with some kids, and a kindergartner says to another kindergartner, "I'm having a party on Friday, and you can't come because of the way you look."
Wow.
Now, I watched my student to see what my student was going to be. She got an F for the day because she did nothing. But
Really?
that's the root. Right there was the teaching moment
Yeah.
for parents, for
No.
teachers.
Now, what does it matter if you can't come because of your color, or you can't come because I don't like you, or you can't come? Why is that? That's actually, I'm not even sure I voted for this, by the way.
Oh, good. I'm glad you didn't. Well,
No,
I hope you did. But
No,
here's-
but the reason why is because to me, if you tell that little kid you can't come, like for instance, I had eczema,
yeah,
okay, and people were relentless at times because of that. I mean, my saying is, I spent 4 years in high school and the next 20 trying to recover from it.
yeah.
But it was why they're picking on you seems to me to be almost or quantifying that has always bothered me.
Yeah.
Because people humiliating somebody else to me is what the issue is. And in your class, because that you were just witnessed, picking on that kid because of color is not any different than picking on them because they've got red hair or green eyes or people. A child will find a reason to try to.
It is a little bit different, Representative. You know this because it's a violation of the Civil Rights Act to begin with. I mean, we have strong laws that protect two things, race and religion. And when bullying happens, and this came down from the U.S. Department of Education this year, when that happens in a school or a school-sanctioned program, for those two things, color of skin or race, or religion, when bullying happens, that's a civil rights issue. And it is, a clear violation of federal law.
Even with children that young, it's still
yes,
considered
in
really?
school, in
Okay.
American public schools.
Okay.
We've already had that discussion, so that's way beyond the New Hampshire legislature. That's federal mandate. But I mean, one of the key things here is that we who research this and those who witness it every day in school know things are getting out of hand.
Oh, yeah.
And we've got to focus parents' attention. We've got to focus teachers' attention. We've got to focus neighbors' attention back on do we want to live in a society where we don't get along anymore? And let's talk about the most controversial part of the law that was passed in New Hampshire too, which is, and it shouldn't be controversial at all. In fact, it's been the model for 15 other states. in the law, we said that if a student comes into Mr. Dick's class, well, first let me say something. I was saying that bullying happens younger, but the older, so it, if you look at it, it peaks right now in girls. Actually, the highest number of bullying incidents are about 5th grade in girls. It's about 7th to 8th grade in boys, because boys develop later,
Sure.
and don't have the intellectual capacity to be as mean until later. But
Yeah, girls are a lot better at that.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah, and girl bullying outnumbers boy bullying in workplace lawsuits because of bullying in the workplace are higher among women right now, which is really interesting.
I'm actually not surprised, only because just anecdotally, you always hear about how some women really just don't get along with other women.
Yeah,
The whole
yeah, I don't know.
competition thing.
I mean, we still don't understand exactly why, but
Yeah.
we know the girl culture has changed
Yeah.
dramatically in our country. But anyway, what you see is that by the time they get to high school, the incidents are fewer because you develop a lot of resistance to bullying. You have
Sure.
your own posse, or you have some kids, or they have their own, ways of dealing with it.
Yeah.
They've
Yeah.
learned those. But when it does happen, it has more fatal and more serious consequences. So
Yeah.
that's where we see the post-traumatic stress. We see kids going to Boston Children's Hospital, which we had many in our state last year. So the older it happens more rare than it's true bullying, as we talked about in the definition. But when it does happen, it's more severe, and that's why. But really, our efforts, and the point I was trying to make with that story about the preschool is, we've got to start younger. We've got to start, and right now, I'm working as part of, I work for UNH Cooperative Extension. I'm the Family Life and Family Policy Specialist, and we're lucky enough to have still, though we were cut severely, we have a group of educators that are
I've heard.
working on this issue. Well, we took I've got to say, and you know it, but we took the largest hit of any university in the history of a public-funded university in the
Really?
history of America. The largest hit, and we're going to lose
Want
40.
to borrow my hand grenade?
We're going to lose 40 employees at UNH Cooperative Extension, and these are people who not only help your farm do better, help your garden grow better, but have been working to keep people out of the system in New Hampshire family work. And these are dedicated people who work day and night. I'm not over here because I just wanted to come to Manchester tonight. We work this way every day. But I want to say that we've been working really hard, and we got some help from the Endowment for Health to develop a curriculum. We're calling it the Courage to Care, and we're going to test it this fall with some of the rural middle schools. And what we're going to try and teach, and it'll be taught by a counselor in the school, and we'll help train the counselors. And what we're going to try to do is teach kids again the basic lessons of how to get along with other people. There's about 6 things that we know about bullies that makes them different from the other kids. And there are about 5 things that kids can do to inoculate themselves against bullying. And one is to
That
be
was gonna be my question.
be courageous,
Right.
to stand up. In my mind, one of the problems, let me give you a scenario that's the worst thing I've seen in 30 years of teaching college. We had a group of students at UNH, and many of your watchers probably read about this in the paper, but about a year and a half ago, in the middle of winter, there was a freshman being beaten by a senior outside a dormitory at about 1:30 in the morning on the way to a very popular late-night eating place in Durham. 40 students of our students walked by and watched this.
Wow.
And not one of them, there was one of those blue telephones that goes straight to the campus police. Not one of them bothered to pick up the phone.
Incredible.
Now, is that, and the question that our president asked, which I think is the question that we all have to ask, is this the society that you want to live in?
Yeah.
Here in New Hampshire, we're about community. We're not about turning the other. When our grandparents saw a barn burning down, they didn't turn the other way
Yeah.
and say, "Oh, those people."
Right, of course. It almost sounds sociopathic to me, the idea that someone could actually watch something
Well, this
like that
goes
happen
on,
and just
and
watch.
Mr. Dick can correct me if I'm wrong, but this behavior goes on in our school always, every day. We see kids getting mercilessly taunted and
Yeah,
picked on.
yeah.
And so one of the things we've got to, I mean, that's the whole idea, the courage to care. We've got to teach kids that, listen, maybe you're afraid of that guy. Maybe you don't want to get involved, but there are a couple of things you could do. Pick up the phone and call somebody, run down the hall, tell another teacher, or at the very minimum, stay around and comfort the victim.
Right.
You know, or make sure they get home okay. You know,
Yeah.
that's what living in a society is. If any of you guys left here tonight and saw a car wreck down the street, I don't think you'd just drive away,
Right.
you know, without at least picking up the
What
phone.
if I
course.
caused the car wreck?
Well, then
you got to get
know,
out of there.
Get out of
Yeah,
there.
get
Yeah,
out
well,
of there. Yeah.
we all know about, I mean, you know, politicians are always an exception. These rules of civility,
Yeah,
especially
well,
in New Hampshire. I know.
Oh, yeah, it's brutal.
Anyway, that's my sermon for the evening.
Sermon. Yeah, you know, is there any statistics as to places that it occurs more, like certain regions
Yeah.
of the country, certain areas, certain cities?
Well, it's interesting. The Center for Disease Control last year picked Massachusetts as the state to do the most in-depth study that's ever been done of both the incidence of bullying, how often it occurs, and the effects that it has on other students. And they found that there is over a 60% rate in rural Massachusetts, which I assume is very much like rural New Hampshire, at least, you know, in the northern part of Massachusetts, and that it's about a 60% rate among middle schoolers is what they found. They also found that they put out what they call a morbidity and fatality report, because they found that the rate of suicide was rapidly increasing, that serious psychological trauma, including post-traumatic stress, was occurring. And so, you know, I think New England is one of the prime spots where it's happening. It looks different, and the research shows this. It looks different in rural areas than it does in urban areas for two reasons. One, in Manchester may be more of an urban area. I'm not sure, but it may have, it probably,
For New
it
Hampshire,
probably
it's
has
certain-
characteristics of both, because you guys draw from clear over in Derry, and, you know, you have students.
We have Hooksett.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, Candia, Auburn still, although not for much longer.
Right, but you bring in some special ed kids from all over to the district too. So, but what we see in rural areas is that there's less places to hide. You know, so kids in bigger urban schools say, hey, you know, I can always find anonymity. You know, I can find and get away from the bully. It's harder to do that. The other thing is there's this sense of vigilante justice in a rural area that doesn't normally exist in a city. Sometimes it does in pockets in cities.
Sure.
But so the way families deal with it, you know, and this worries me. And one of the myths about, I mean, there are about 10 myths we've discovered. We did some polling of parents throughout New Hampshire, and there's some things that you know, I hope, and this is something I've really tried to get teachers to help us fight these myths. Like one of the myths that a lot of men have, some moms too, but mostly dads, say that if you get picked on, you're a wimp. You know, and you better learn to fight back. Well, in this day and age, that's the most dangerous thing you could tell your child.
That macho
to,
kind of
yeah,
attitude,
to fight
yeah.
back, because to tell you the truth, you may be dealing with somebody else's severe mental illness. You can't predict what that kid's going to be or do. And so if you tell your child to go fight back, now it's okay to tell them to be assertive, to
Right.
stand up and say, that's not okay, don't do that. But it's not okay to threaten the other kid, because you might be pulling the trigger on a hand grenade.
Or even, would you say, so you don't go back with an insult of your own.
Right,
You're not
right,
inviting me
right,
to your
yeah,
party
yeah,
because
so-
of how I look. Well,
so
I
if
don't
you-
want to go because you're ugly.
If you look at it, there's a continuum here.
That would be bad,
There's a
right.
continuum. Over here, yeah.
No,
Over
but I'm
he-
being serious. I mean,
no,
that's what
no,
you see
no,
happen.
that's,
I see it all
yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
And there's a continuum here, and this is really what we've got to teach our kids. So this is doing nothing right here.
Right.
And this is being aggressive, retaliating. And that's where most of the school shooters ended up that I've seen, because you can't control those emotions. If you've been bullied for 30 years and one day you decide to do
And you're
something
still in
about
high
it.
school.
Well, yeah, that's a possibility too. But, and let me finish my thought here before you say anything else. So here's the deal. Where we want our kids to learn is to be assertive, and that's right in the middle. So you say, no, that's not okay. Don't say that to me. No one should say that to me. and you know, and then go tell somebody or
Now-
do something about it.
Now,
But
what if it's a physical confrontation?
if
though?
it's a physical confrontation, you should get out of it. You
Yeah.
know, with a bully that you don't know, because one, it probably started because of an imbalance of power.
Yeah.
Two, you can't predict not only the bully's behavior but your own behavior.
Right.
And you could end up doing something really stupid. And I'll tell you, the most devastating school violence incidents, and I've responded to over 400 in my career, have been those of kids who were retaliating and didn't know how mad they really were inside.
Yeah.
And everyone, and I've interviewed as part of a longitudinal research project I got involved with right after my best friend was shot and killed. I've interviewed over 420 young people under the age of 18 who've killed. And I can tell you the one thing they tell you is that if they had it to do over again, they would have done everything different. The second thing, the second thing that was really important is that they tried to tell people
Right.
what was going on, and no one listened.
They got
And,
nowhere.
and that's really, you know, reflected in the research. What we found is this, and these are powerful studies that say that, and this was one of the reasons we needed the law representative, is that about 80% of bullying incidences get reported, but only about 2% of those got actual interference by adults that was
Something was
effective.
done about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something effective was done about it.
Why is that? Because I was going to ask you. I would have thought another myth was that too many people think. You mentioned that men feel if you're being picked on, you're a wimp. I would also assume that a lot of men feel if you tell someone you're being picked on, you're a
Yeah,
bigger
yeah,
wimp.
yeah.
But now you're saying 80% have been reported and only 2% acted
Right.
on.
So kids do tell. I
Yeah.
mean, they do tell. It's just that parents or other people say, "Oh, well, that happens."
Wow.
Or, and here's another myth, that it's a rite of passage. When in our society, I want you guys to tell me, when did post-traumatic stress, depression, nervousness, suicidal thoughts, when did that become a rite of passage in our society? When did someone else's right to put you down and make fun of you because you have some condition or some difference than them, when did that become a right in our society, a rite of passage? That's ridiculous. You know, and there are a lot of these myths out there, and for some reason parents heard them and they pick them up and perpetuate them. And we've got to fight these myths because they're becoming deadly.
Yeah. Another one that I heard up at the State House, and I've never really looked into it myself, was that a high percentage of these kids were on Ritalin or medication, but I don't know if that's true. That was just somebody told me, so therefore...
The kids that are being bullied or the bullies?
The kids that, like in the Columbine and those things, the children that actually tweak
Okay.
are, a lot of them are on medication.
They're on anxiety medications because of the bullying they've experienced. I mean, if you have a child in your life right now...
Okay, but just back up. What's the percentage of those kids that actually tweak that were on medication?
Do you mean that are doing the bullying or get bullied to
The
the
ones
point
that-
where they snap?
The ones
Ones
that
that snap.
snap.
Okay.
Okay,
Oh.
the
Because
ones
I
that-
wasn't sure what you...
Yeah,
the-
I mean, there isn't a causal relationship there. I mean, that's not something we prove. What we do know is that many of the kids who've become school shooters were taking anti-anxiety medication. And a lot of those were not the ADD or ADHD drugs. They were the Prozac derivatives. You know, and those are the common anti-anxiety drugs right now.
Do you know what the percentage of the shooters are?
Of the shooters, of the 54 that we studied,
Yes.
about 40 of them had been.
Really?
But I'll tell you what happens. I mean,
I mean,
my
but you
theory
don't
about
see-
that.
You don't see, in other words, like for instance, if you look at a lot of the advertisements for certain medications, the anti-anxiety medications or whatever, they'll say, the side effects of this could be you might kill
Right,
yourself.
right.
And if you feel like killing yourself, but for a
Yeah.
boy and killing yourself and killing somebody else, there's a pretty fine line right there.
And not in school shootings. Actually, the two are correlated. In fact, I would tell you that all 54 of the school shootings I've been at, including the most recent one I was at, which was the awful shootings at Virginia Tech, every one of those were suicide attempts. So they were really two sides of the same coin.
Yeah,
It was a
exactly.
grandiose crazy way of killing yourself. But
Going out in
they-
style, so to speak.
Yeah, and there is a correlation between suicide and those drugs, and extreme suicide. And the reason is, or the theory is, we don't know if this is the reason, that, if you've been depressed for a long time, say somebody's been picking on you since high school, and you've been depressed for a long time, and all of a sudden this drug makes you feel a little better. Well, suicide doesn't happen on the downside of depression. Suicide happens on the upside. So
that
what
I
the
don't.
drugs,
Okay.
yeah, so what the
Interesting.
drugs do is free the child to act on. But let me look at that statistic in another way, and this is more dramatic and something for parents to think about. This year, this past school year, 189,000 American children. Now think about this. This is a statistics that comes from a reliable source, the U.S. Department of Education. 189,000 kids were afraid to come to school and stayed home from school every school day because of a bully.
Wow.
Now, here's another stat. 192,000 children
Well, we'll get it.
were 192,000 children brought a weapon to school
Wow.
because they were afraid.
We're just going to grab this call. Probably the only call we'll have time for today. But hi, welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. Who's this?
Hey, what's up, guys? It's Jeff.
Jeff who?
Anyway,
Jeff Meyer?
Jeff Meyer? Do you know Jeff
No,
Meyer?
Jeff Meyer.
anyway, what's your question?
Why'd you think you know it? Listen, I was listening to the conversation, and it's definitely compelling. My theory with taking the Ritalins, and I was prescribed Ritalin at a young age, and when I went to the doctor, I mean, they had me in and out, asked me a few questions, and boom, put me on prescriptions. I ended up sniffing Ritalin and getting into drugs from the prescribed medications from my doctor, and I feel like there needs to be some accountability from a doctor's standpoint instead of, there's some kind of incentive for doctors just to give everyone medication. There's financial backing to that. I mean, if you go to a doctor
Sure.
for 2 seconds, they'll give you anything you want, and I think there's got to be some kind of accountability from a doctor's standpoint. I mean, great, a lot of kids get bullied, and I understand that it can be a problem, it leads to depression and this and that, but I think that a lot of times growing up as a young boy, you're going to have all these mixed feelings, and the answer is not necessarily to dope them up on a ton of pills
Right.
off the bat. They could be depressed for a million different reasons, or they may not even be necessarily depressed. They could just be going through some normal adolescent changes, and they communicate this to the doctor, and boom, let's juice them up on Ritalin, let's juice them up on Adderall, let's give them all these antipsychotic drugs. And I just think that if it's a whole generation of kids that are on pills, I mean, there's not too many people that I know that are on some kind of medication. I think
Right.
that leads to a lot of problems. I mean, there's no studies or statistics that show down the line is this going to cause violent repercussions, stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, thanks, Jeff. We'll let you go on that because it's almost the end of the
All right.
show. But I do agree with you, and thank you for calling in.
Just to comment on what Jeff said, the American Psychiatric Association says that about 25% of what we diagnose as ADD is actually hyperkinesis in the brain.
Really.
And I think I think what it is that it's actually ADD or ADHD.
Okay.
Only about 25%. What I think the other 75% is anger, and I think your caller's right. A lot of these drugs make that anger worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
Yep.
over medicated in this society.
But listen, guys. Let's don't end on a bad note. This
Yeah.
this is a solvable problem. It's going to take just a little bit of money, but I can tell you, if the legislature would understand that a few dollars spent here could save us millions in the long run, they'd put their money where their thought is.
I've had trouble with the legislature because my big thing is since the '60s is the breakdown of the family has been huge.
Yeah.
One of the, in a lot of the research I've done, one of the things that stuck out to me was Africa. They tried to introduce elephants into this reserve in Africa, and they used very young elephants because that was the easiest to transport. And as those young bull elephants got to be adolescent, they started killing off the white rhinos. Very unusual behavior for an elephant to just kill something just for fun. And they didn't know what was going on. They ended up having to destroy a few of the elephants. And they finally figured out the solution was they introduced full-grown bull elephants into the herd. and the kids quieted right down. They calmed right down. I think a big part of our problem in this country today, and it's my show, so I get the last word, is the breakdown of the family and the fact that fathers aren't around.
Yeah.
Because that's where
Yeah.
little boys learn those
Yeah.
limitations
But
of how to deal with one another.
Fathers are important to girls too. And,
Oh, I
and
know,
the
sure,
research-
yeah.
Research shows that. But
You need two parents,
But
ideally.
you know, the other thing is we've all got to expand our definition of family a little bit. You know, there are many successful families that don't look like the Cleavers. In fact, there's very few families that look like the Cleavers. anymore.
There's few families, but we know through enough research that the ideal family is still the biological parents in the home. Those have the greatest chances of success. There's other families that don't look the same, that are successful, but their percentages aren't really that good.
Well, as a foster parent, I'd like to argue that with you on another
Okay.
show.
Anyway, thank you very much, Dr. Smith, for coming, and thank you, Ben, for hanging around in our audience.
Thanks for having us too. What a
Thank you,
nice
yes,
show you've
thank
got.
you.
Let's see. Next week, we're going to be talking about something a lot more important, fish and game stuff.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
All right.
There's some bullies over there.
Yeah, I know.
You're on that committee, right?
Oh, yeah, that's a coincidence. Anyway, yeah, next week we have, from New Hampshire Wildlife, we have Rick Olson, and from our Executive Director for Fish and Game, Glenn Normando, we're going to talk a little bit about a case where we're so happy in this country today. We got some guy in, I believe he's from Manchester, who used somebody's land up north. He fell out of a tree stand and is suing the guy whose land it was on, which sounds funny, but it has huge ramifications because people aren't going to want anybody on their land if they're going to sue everybody.
Right, exactly.
So we're going to talk about that and other fish and game laws and things going on with our deer population next week. So tune in next week for fish and game stuff. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.